Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. This morning we're going to meditate few minutes. After the meditation, Bhavan Kusala is going to give a Dhamma talk. After Dhamma talk, question and answer and chanting. So right now, Tandas are going to lead the loving kindness meditation.
Let's breathe in and breathe out gently to relax mind and body before we spread loving kindness thoughts. For a couple of minutes, let's breathe in and breathe out gently. Now let's spread loving kindness thoughts in this way. May all the living beings be physically well. May all the living beings be free from incoming disturbances. May all the living beings be mentally well. Let's spread loving kindness thoughts in this way until we hear the bell sound.
Thank you, Reverend Chansara, leading the loving kindness meditation. Right now is time for the Dhamma Talk. Reverend Kusala is going to give a Dhamma Talk right now.
Okay. Happy New Year, everybody. It's time to, let me get this back here a little bit. There we go. I'm too old for close-ups. Okay, I was wondering what I was going to talk about today, because this is the first Sunday I've given a talk here at IBMC. Last Sunday, I gave a talk in Montclair at the UU congregation of Montclair, and it was fun. And so this Sunday, I'm going to talk about things I have found interesting and unusual about Buddhism over my years of practice and study, and you might find some of these interesting as well. Okay, first thing I found interesting was the way the Buddha was born, the way Siddhartha was born, in a very unusual way. He was born out of the side of his mother, and then took 7 steps on lotus flowers, and the rain came from the heavens and washed him off in his first birth. Now, it's difficult, I think, for a Westerner to look at that as factual and scientific, but if you look at some of the birth stories of famous spiritual people, Christ, for instance, Immaculate Conception, what you find is there's a certain logic behind it. It makes it so interesting and so unusual, it's hard to forget. And I think that's how we remember these stories for such a long period of time, you know, thousands of years in some cases, because they're just not normal stories, and that makes it special. And of course, the people in the story are special as well. Now, unfortunately, the Buddha's mother, Maya, died 7 days after his birth and went to heaven. And her sister, who was also married to the king, took over as Siddhartha's stepmother and raised him. Well, you know, in the West again, it's an interesting idea to marry both sisters and have a multitude of wives. And so that also stuck with me. I'm going, okay, so the sister raised him. But then the most interesting thing to me about the sister, Prajapati, who raised Siddhartha, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, she was left without a husband because the king had died, and she was left without a stepson because Siddhartha became the Buddha and left, and she didn't have a man in her life. And in India at that time, you really needed to have a man in your life. And so she asked the Buddha to ordain her. And he said, no, I can't do that because there's no women ordained in India at the time, and it might invalidate some of my teachings to have a woman ordained, and so I can't do it. And she was very disappointed, but she didn't give up, and she went to the next little village that he was talking in and said the same thing. Why can't you ordain me as a nun? Why don't you give me something to do with the rest of my life? Why can't you do that? And he explained again. And then they went on to the next village, and she took a different approach now. She said, I'm going to talk to Ananda, and I'm going to have Ananda ask the Buddha to ordain me. And so she went and found Ananda, and Ananda said, yes, I can do that. And I think I can talk him into it. And so Ananda went to the Buddha and said to the Buddha, your stepmother raised you and kept you alive when you couldn't do it yourself. And now she's lost both men in her life, her stepson and her husband. And so why can't you ordain her as a nun? And he said, well, because we don't have any nuns, and it might invalidate my teachings, and it wouldn't be good for the Dharma because the Dharma is too important, and et cetera, et cetera. So then Ananda came up with a clever response. Ananda said, well, can a woman become enlightened? And the Buddha said, yes, of course. And then Ananda said, well, why can't a woman be a nun? And the Buddha sort of gave up and said, okay, she's going to be the first nun. And he ordained her and as the first nun in Buddhism. And there's a book called the Therigatha. And these are the poems of the first nuns. And you can find free versions if you do Google search, but you can also find other versions on Amazon.com if you're curious about what the first nuns in Buddhism had to say about living as a nun. So that's one of the first things I found just fascinating about Buddhism, is just this whole idea of no women being ordained, that the Buddha was born in such an unusual way, and that enlightenment was the key to ordination, because both men and women have the potential to be enlightened, and that's what I call Buddha nature. Buddha nature is the potential for enlightenment, the potential for nirvana. Okay, second thing I found interesting, I was reading a story, and I forget what magazine or book or article I was reading, but it was about a fellow in Australia. And this was a few years ago, and he really liked Buddhism, and he always wanted to be a monk, and he was a vegetarian. And he wanted to get ordained in the Theravada tradition where they eat meat. So he had this sort of crisis of conscience. You know, he was concerned that he may have to eat meat and then break his vegetarian lifestyle or commitment. So I thought, what an interesting, dilemma to find yourself in. You become a vegetarian because you don't want to cause suffering to the animals you're going to eat, and yet, as a Buddhist monk, you don't want to cause suffering, and yet you're allowed to eat meat. Now, I've got to add that if you eat meat as a Buddhist monk, there are two requirements. The first one is the animal cannot be killed specifically for you. So in the old days, if, say, a farmer invited the monks to dinner and he picked out his favorite hog to slaughter, that the monks couldn't eat that meat because it was slaughtered for them. There's also a rule that says if you hear the animal cry in pain, that you can't eat it either. So there are a couple requirements that go into eating meat as a Buddhist monk that are best to follow. Now, one of the questions that came up as I'm reading all this stuff, and by the way, the guy did become ordained as a Buddhist monk, and I don't know how he rectified the idea of having to eat meat, but apparently he did, and he's still a monk. But then this question came up that I found just fascinating. And it's okay, if you're going to kill an animal to eat, is it better to kill one big animal that can feed many people, or is it better to feed a small animal and kill many more of them? So are you going to kill one cow to feed 100 people, or are you going to kill 1,000 shrimp to feed 100 people? And there are some philosophers and some Buddhists that have ideas that go either way. Okay, so some think it's better to kill small animals and more of them, and some feel it's better to kill one big animal and feed more from that. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I thought it was an interesting question and another dilemma that a monk has to face when they're eating meat. Okay, so now the Buddha, was raised in 3 palaces, it said. And I love the story of the Buddha because it really makes you appreciate the fact that if you're born in South Central or born in Palos Verdes, you've got the same issues basically because you're a human being and you have to deal with them. And in both cases, there is suffering involved. There's suffering in Palos Verdes and there's suffering in South Central. So nobody gets out free in this lifetime from suffering. So the Buddha was like the Palos Verdes guy. He had 3 palaces and he had the finest clothes and he always had young people around him and he had plenty to eat and apparently he didn't get very sick. And so the story of him going out into the city for the first time with his charioteer Channa, I found fascinating. And I was talking to Achan Amro about this story, and he came up with an interesting insight. So as you all know, if you've heard the story, the Buddha and his charioteer went out into the streets of the city and they saw this really sick person, this really old person, this really dead person, and this really holy person. And Achan Amro said to me at a conference we had, he said, you know what the most important vision of those 4 visions turns out to be? And I said, no, what do you think? What's the most important? He said, the most important vision was the last one, that when the future Buddha, Siddhartha, saw the holy person, he realized at some level that there was a way out of suffering. And that was the key to holy life. And I had never thought about it in that way. I thought the other 3 were much more interesting, that he had never seen a really sick person or a really old person or a really dead person, and how it just sort of transformed his way of looking at the world in this one outing with Channa. And yet Achan Amro, and I think he's right about this, said, but the key was the holy person. So at the age of 35, he left his family at 29. And I thought that was interesting too, because as Venerable Hung Shir said one time, and even wrote a song about it, he said, before he left his wife, he said, when I find the answer, when I become free from suffering, I'll come back and get you. I'm going to come back. And, okay. His wife, I'm sure, just said, okay, see you then. And he went out, and 6 years later, at the age of 35, he achieved his nirvana. And he did finally come back. And his wife brought her son, their son, little Rahula, and said, this is your dad. This is your dad. I told you all about him. And he used to be a very rich man. He has a lot of stuff. And you should go up and ask for your inheritance. And so little Rahula went up to his dad, who was now the Buddha, and said, Dad, can you give me my inheritance? I want my inheritance. Mom said that you have a lot of money. Can you give me my inheritance? And the Buddha thought for a moment and said, sure, son, I can give you your inheritance. I'm going to make you a monk. So he ordained his son and became a monk. And now, again, we have a woman who's been abandoned by all her men, her son and her husband, and there she stands alone. And she says, well, how about me? What am I going to do? And he said, well, I'll ordain you as well. And so she became ordained too as a nun. So the whole family became monks and nuns. And again, I found that just fascinating. In 1994, and the picture behind me are the ordaining masters of the grand ordination we had here in 1994, where I took my novice ordination. And 2 years later, I took my full ordination. But at that 1994 ordination, there was a Vietnamese family. And the family, mother, father, and daughter. And they were all at the grand ordination to get ordained. So the whole family got ordained. And then after the ordination process, dad went to one temple, mom went to another temple, and the daughter went to a third temple. And I thought to myself, wow, talk about a commitment, that the whole family was so involved with Buddhism that they felt the best way to spend the rest of their life was as a monk or a nun. And they came to that 1994 ordination for that purpose and received the ordination, and off they went. So that just sort of blew my mind when I thought about it, that a whole family could see Buddhism as being the way out, as the refuge, as a way of ending their suffering and finding joy and peace in this world. Okay, so as I continued to read and understand, I came upon some stories about the Buddha where he would be able to do these magical, mystical things, even fly through the air. And I just, being a Westerner, I thought to myself, man, I can't buy into that. I came to Buddhism for the philosophy and the practice and a way of understanding myself and a way of ending some of my suffering in this very lifetime. So I went to my primary Dharma teacher at the time, Dr. Ratnasara, and I said, Dr. Ratnasara, all these little fairy tales that I keep reading about in Buddhism, do I have to believe those things? Because I can't. I just don't buy into it. And he looked at me and he said in a very understanding way, he said, no, Kusala, it's okay. It's okay. He said, they're in there for a purpose. But it's not necessarily the kind of truth you're looking for. He said they're in there because they allow a variety of people to come to Buddhism. So think of a tree and think of the bark on a tree. Now the tree can't survive without the bark, and the bark can't survive without the tree. So these stories, these mystical stories, are the bark of the tree. But the core of the tree is the Dharma and enlightenment. That's the core. But the bark keeps Buddhism alive because people are fascinated by that stuff. Now, I can understand why you're not. And I understand that you're more interested in the philosophy than the mystical stories, but they both work together. And believe me, you don't have to believe that to be true in order to practice the philosophy and the Dharma of Buddhism. And I said, okay. So I was able to look at that in a much different way and appreciate the stories for what they were, but of course appreciate the philosophy, because the philosophy was the key to this whole practice and to this whole path. Okay, so now we're going along and practicing, and everything's doing really good, and I'm going, okay, yeah. But how about this meditation? Do we really need to meditate every day? In the Zen tradition, because here at the center, we were founded by Venerable Thich Thien Nhan. And Venerable Thich Thien Nhan was from the Tien tradition, Thien, which is the Zen tradition in Vietnam. And in the Zen tradition, there's a strong emphasis on practice and meditation and the transformation of consciousness. Okay, so should we practice every day? Well, if you're a layperson and you have a family and you have a job and you have car payments and you have a mortgage and you have all those other things, practicing can really enhance your life and make your life better. But it's hard to find time every day in a consistent way. But if you can, yeah, absolutely. You don't want to miss it. How long should you meditate? Well, I think the optimal time in meditation is probably around 45 minutes. But if you can get 10 minutes in a day, maybe 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, think of it as bookends on your day, that's fine. And that will make a difference. And then somebody says, but how do you know it's making a difference? How can you tell that your meditation practice is actually working? Well, you can, because if you tend to be a little bit more patient, tend to have a little more kindness running through your day, you are able to sleep more soundly and wake up in an energetic way, that probably the meditation is working, it's fine. But below the surface, it's also transforming your consciousness to allow you to look at the world in a much different way. But it's subtle and it's slow, it's a gradual process, so it's very hard to identify. Think of it this way. Say you live with somebody, like we live here in this community at IBMC, and you see the person every day, and you have interactions and you talk and blah, 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 blah. So is the person getting older? Well, logically, we would say, yes, the person is getting older, but it's really hard to tell because I see them every day, and aging is such a gradual process that it's hard to point out any specifics of that person's aging. But now say you haven't seen the person in 10 years and you have a chance encounter at Vaughn's supermarket, and there he is, and you take a look at him and you go, whoa, he's really aged. Because there's been this pause in your relationship for 10 years. So if you were able to see yourself when you started to meditate and then see yourself 10 years later, and the way you responded to the world rather than the way you reacted to the world, you could probably tell the difference. You could probably see something has changed. You might even be able to point at it and identify it as, yeah, I can see this meditation practice is starting to work because look at what I'm doing now that I never did before. But because we live with ourselves and see ourselves every day and every moment of the day, sometimes it's hard to discern what changes have occurred or what changes are occurring. So we need to have the confidence of a meditator. Confidence in this way, that we sit down to meditate, not because we know there's going to be a change, not because we expect there to be a change, but because change is one of the primary motivations of our life. The Buddha said we have 3 key philosophies that we need to keep aware of all the time. We should base our life on these 3 key philosophies. Now, number 1 is anicca. Everything is always changing moment to moment all the time. So we don't need to pretend to have faith or even have a false sense of confidence that when we're meditating, the change is going to happen. A change always happens, and meditation makes that change a positive one. The second aspect of Buddhist philosophy or Dhammology is that life is ultimately unsatisfactory because we have desire, we have attachment, and everything changes. Now, the problem with the change is that even when things are good and the way they're supposed to be, they only last for a moment or two. And then some of the conditions necessary for that to be good or perfect changes, as does the perfection or the good. And now we're disappointed. Why did it have to change? Couldn't it stop changing just for a moment so I could enjoy the day or the week or the month because it was just perfect? And it doesn't work that way. So the desire is to hold on. The desire is the attachment to hold on and not let the good stuff change. And the aversion we have, which is another form of desire, is to push away and change immediately and get rid of. And those two things, the attachment and the aversion, causes us so much suffering that Buddhism says this meditation practice, this practice of the Dharma, is designed to bring you to a place of peace, joy, and equanimity where there is no attachment, where there is no aversion, where everything is just the way it's supposed to be, and you have acceptance of that. And because you accept it the way it is, not the way it's supposed to be, you are suffering less. Okay, all makes sense so far. All you have to do is just look at your life and look at your practice, and you see the change and you see the dissatisfaction, because we always want things to be different than they are. And then the third thing the Buddha said is so important in our practice is the fact that we are not who we think we are. We do not exist in the way we think we do, because we have something called a personality or an ego, which is a wonderful gift. We need it in this very complicated world, but this separation of thinker and thinking, okay, is an important aspect of meditation, that we create a false dichotomy. Now, having said false dichotomy, Reverend Hung Sure one time said, "That's a false dichotomy, Kusala. That's a false dichotomy." And I said to him, "But aren't all dichotomies false?" And he said, "Yes, they are." And why would all dichotomies be false? Because the ultimate reality, according to Buddhism, is that everything is interconnected and interdependent. And so having a dichotomy, breaking something into two when there's literally only one, becomes false and misleading. But in our meditation practice, we come to realize that the thinker and the thinking are two different things. And if we can start to understand what the thinker is, we start to see that we have this consciousness and subconsciousness that allows us to formulate what our existence means to us. So the way we think is the way we exist. And if you want to change your existence and make it more positive, you need to change the way you think about your existence. And what did Sidney Poitier, who just passed away at 94, I think. Great actor, great man. At one point in an interview I was watching, they asked him, "What did you find out about yourself? You've done a lot of work. You've been a social activist. You've been an actor who has won awards. You've lived a good lifestyle, a good life. But what have you found out about yourself?" And, he thought for a moment. There was a pause, and he thought for a moment, and he said, "I'm a good person. That's what I realized, that I'm a good person." And I thought to myself, wouldn't that be nice once we get to be 80 or 90, if we're ever so lucky, to look back at our life and say to ourselves, I was a good person. And that's what this path of Buddhism allows us. It allows us to be a much better person because we have discipline and we have meditation and we have wisdom. Now, the discipline, again, I was surprised by the discipline because when I first came to Buddhism, I was told that if you want to be an official Buddhist, you have to take 5 precepts and 3 refuges. And I'm going, okay, 5 precepts. What the hell are those? You know, and are they like the 10 commandments? Is that what we need to follow? And my teacher at the time, Shinzen Young, said, no, it's much different. So he said, the first precept is you have to honor life. Okay, well, how do you honor life? Well, you don't take it. You don't kill it. You don't snuff it out. Okay. So does that mean that if I have a cockroach in my room, that I shouldn't kill it? He said, well, if you can find a workaround to that, that would be better. That would be better. If you can catch it and take it outside, or keep your room so clean that the cockroaches don't want to go in there, or, you know, put a little spacer between the bottom of the door and the floor so nothing can get through. There are a lot of ways to not kill a cockroach, but it requires you to think about how not to do it. And it requires you to see that every life has value. So I tell you, when I became a Buddhist, I didn't think that the life of a cockroach had much value, and the life of a mosquito had even less. But as I practiced and as I started to understand how rare it is to be born, then it started to dawn on me that yes, all life deserves a chance if it finally makes it here. We're the only planet in the universe that we know of that can support life as we know it. It's amazing. And they keep showing up. I don't know how many insects or mammals or birds or fish, I don't know how many there are, but there's always more, most of the time. Sometimes some of the creatures become extinct, but then others seem to take their place. And humans, there's no stopping us. We've got 7 billion and we're working on more. Okay, no stopping us. And each one of those lives, whether it's in Afghanistan or Cambodia or South Central or Palos Verdes, has value. It has value. So that was a very interesting wake-up call when I took that first precept and started to understand what it meant. The second precept was, stealing stuff, which I never really did anyway. But I thought to myself, why is there so much emphasis on not stealing? And here in Los Angeles, we've had these groups of people jump into department stores and steal stuff, and they all run out together, and there's like 100 of them, and they catch 10 of them, and it's amazing. How are those purses and shoes going to change your life in a positive way? I thought to myself. Well, it dawned on me after thinking about not taking life and then not stealing, is that the not stealing thing is because we are so delusional that we think we own stuff. And I'm going, wow, but don't I own my car? It's, you pay cash or you charge it or you credit, and you get a maintenance and you polish it up and then make it look good, and you feel good behind the wheel, and it has a heater if it's cold, and air conditioning if it's warm. And but I got this thing called a receipt, that says I own this car. And then the government, the state of California, says in my registration that I own this car, that I'm responsible for this car. And then my insurance company says, you need us because you're responsible for that car. And if you get into an accident, they're going to take everything you own. So get insurance. And we just happen to have a wonderful policy for you. I say, oh, okay. So here we go. So we have the delusion of ownership. And that delusion causes us to covet, hold on to, cling to, prevent, protect, whatever it is we think we own. Now, the other day, I went out to my car after the rain. We had 4 inches of rain downtown LA a few days ago, man. And you know what I found on my car? I found cat footprints all over my car. They walked up the windshield, they walked on the roof, they walked on the hood, they walked on the trunk. I had these little cat footprints everywhere. And I thought to myself, don't these cats know that I own this car? It's not their property and they shouldn't be on it. And then it dawned on me that no, the cats really didn't know anybody owned this car. The cats don't even know what a car is. So there you go. You know, it's just this delusion that creates us more suffering. So the idea is we don't want to steal stuff because that causes the person that thinks they own the stuff we're stealing to suffer even more. Okay, makes sense to me. Number three, sexual misconduct. Oh man, it happens all the time. And why is that bad? Because it causes people who are in relationship to suffer. And because they're suffering, they might do just terrible things to end their suffering by taking revenge on the people who are practicing sexual misconduct. And that's just part of it. It goes on and on and on. So we need to understand that our sexuality is here to populate the earth, and that we need to have restraint and we need to have discipline, and we can do it. It just takes practice. Number 4, speak skillfully. Don't say things you're going to regret a day, a week, or a month later. Don't have hate speech. Don't have all these things that cause people to feel uncomfortable because of what you said, because they think what you said might lead to what you're going to do next. And that causes them fear and dread. And we need to be skillful in what we say and how we say it. And if you come to a place where you can't say anything good about something, noble silence is the way to go. And the 5th thing is don't get high. Because when you get high, you lose every bit of wisdom you ever had, and you end up doing terrible things, probably breaking the other 4 precepts and not even know you're doing it, and causing so much suffering to yourself and to others. And when you finally wake up from your drunken, escapades, there you are in jail after DUI and owe $10,000, and you don't even know how you got there. So sobriety is such an important aspect of the Buddhist path, because we're working hard to transform our consciousness. Those are a few of the things I think were interesting about Buddhism, and still are. I still reflect on them occasionally. I'm going to stop there. I see by the clock on the wall, it's almost time. And wondering if anybody has a comment or a question about anything I've said. Sullivan, how are you?
Good. It's great to see you, Kusala. Thank you for the Dharma Talk. Falls Academy, attachment and aversion. Right? One of the things I keep in mind about meditation, Buddhism, and sometimes the things that some of us expect, like I can meditate all day long, I'm still going to have allergies, and they kill me every time. So meditation is not going to ease that suffering. But I think the one thing that I keep in mind is, the decrease in suffering and the increase in compassion. Mm-hmm. So to me, that kind of sort of is the guiding light in meditating. Yes. So just wanted to share that, and thank you again. And it's good to see you. And allergies, meditation doesn't help. Thanks again.
No, I think you need to take a decongestant. That's better than meditation when it comes to allergies. But one never knows, you know. When I was a kid, I had asthma for a while. And it turned out that I had asthma because of psychological reasons, not physical reasons. And as I grew older and more wise and more skillful, my asthma went away. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So in some cases, meditation might work, but I always have a little bottle of decongestants with me because I too have allergies. And after the heavy rain we had, we're going to have a lot of plants growing and a lot of pollen in the air pretty soon. So I'm ready, but I continue to meditate anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elvin.
Kusala, I was wondering, you were talking about monks and nuns and about how the Buddha ordained his, I guess his mother and his, well, Ananda got the mother, but his wife. And I was wondering about the tradition with monks and nuns. It seems like the Catholics kind of started that, or the Buddhists started it. It only seems amongst the Catholics and the Buddhists, and I guess Orthodox Christians as well, have orders of monks and nuns. And I was wondering where that originated. Do you know who started having monks and nuns and dedicated religious personnel like that?
No, I don't. But I know the monks and nuns, when I participated with the monastic interreligious dialogue, the monks and nuns would get together. You can find that on my website, Buddhism and Catholics. We have a lot in common, but we have a lot not in common as well. And the thing we have most in common is lifestyle. So there's similarities between Catholics and Buddhists, but there's also differences. But I don't know how it started. I can't tell you that. Sorry, Steve.
I wanted to thank you for the effort that you make to get through the bark to the essence of the tree, and how you really hone the talks that you give and the effort that you put into it to really illustrate the Dharma. And I want to thank you very much for the constant effort that you put into these talks. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that very much.
One last comment. I swear those cats wait until you wash your car. And I had cat prints along the side windows of my car once, and I swear the cats are square dancing on my car. And they wait until you wash it in order to really get a lot of footprints on it. So that's my theory on that.
The cats have an interesting sense of humor. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay.
Almost 12 o'clock. Looks like no more question or comment.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Kusala. And we're going to chant for the page 4 and page 10. By the way, next Sunday, which is the 16th of the January, Dhamma teachers, Sai Maharjan, he's going to give a Dhamma talk. So hope to see you everybody next Sunday also. So right now we're going to chant page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavatu
arahatum
samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavatu arahatu samma
sambuddhassa.
Namo tassa bhagavatu arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless. I vow to study them all. Buddha's way is supreme. I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shadow grieve, and the sick find health relief. Ningi ku kong ku poka una di ngadang dung chung sangi kotong padanda. Ninggi ku kong po ka na ni nyadam ju chung sangi ko dang da da da. Ninggi ku kong po ka una di nyadang du chung sangi yadang da da. Om Mani Padme Hum. Thank you for everybody. By the power of the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha, you all be well and happy. Thank you again. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.